On 8th Street and Benning Road Northeast in Washington, D.C. is a little 2.2-mile stretch of tracks home to the DC Streetcar. This little red tram has faithfully served the residents of this corridor for almost a decade. At its peak, it transported over 1 million riders every year while spurring investment and development along a once-neglected corridor of the city. And now, it is time to let it die. We know this might be a shocking take. After all, as urbanists, aren't we supposed to be ride or die for all things transit? Well, we love the DC Streetcar, and when we started to write this video, we intended to lay out a detailed policy program to save it. But as we did so, and understood the steps which would be needed, the more we realized that it wasn't worth saving in its present state. So, let's examine why this is the case and where we go from here. Why shouldn't we save the DC Streetcar? Well, to understand that, we have to go back to the beginning. No, not that far back. That's better. Okay, so, in 2002, DC decides that they should build a streetcar network.
Yes! Oh, thank you, Lord in heaven.
And it immediately hits a storm of political and planning confusion, so only a few miles of demo tracks are built.
Well, we're boned.
Then, in 2006, DC decides to build a streetcar along 8th Street to connect the red and orange line. And there's roadwork already planned for the corridor, so they start laying tracks in 2007.
I'm back, baby.
And then there are some hiccups which start delaying the project.
And boned.
But the city isn't deterred. And in 2010, the incoming Mayor Gray champions an ambitious 37-mile, 8-line streetcar network. Which is then scaled back to 22 miles and 3 lines by 2012.
I can't see what's happening. Are we boned?
And then, in 2014, it all goes to hell.
Yeah, we're boned.
Mayor Gray loses re-election. Without the project's biggest champion, the council guts funding for the streetcar project entirely.
You and I are enemies now.
But remember those tracks laid back in 2007? Well, in 2016, DC uses those to finally open the 2.2-mile DC Streetcar!
Compare your lives to mine and then kill yourselves.
And this line doesn't do half bad. It gets solid ridership for 4 years and then is a strong rebound of ridership in the years after the pandemic.
We're back, baby!
And then, in June 2025, DC announces that they are going to close the streetcar completely in 2 years in favor of new electric trolley buses, or something like that, only to announce in December that the service will be axed in just 6 months in March 2026.
Well, we're boned.
So, what happened here? Why could this project never seem to get off the ground, and how did that lay the foundations for why it shouldn't be saved now? The biggest underlying issue, which has always plagued the streetcar, and just about everything else in DC, was federal roadblocks created by DC's lack of statehood. DC has what we call Schrodinger's sovereignty. It neither has, nor does it not have, the sovereign rights of statehood, depending on how and if it tries to exercise the powers of a state. For example, DC may have a mayor, council, and local institutions under the Home Rule Act, but almost everything they do still requires approval from the federal Congress. Want to set local taxes in DC? Congress, where DC has no representation, has to give the okay. Want to spend the taxes collected from the people of DC on programs for the people of DC? Congress has to sign off again. Want to pass literally any bill or law? Congressional approval required. And this is before you factor in the myriad of federal agencies with oversight power or ownership of various pieces of DC land or infrastructure. For the streetcar, at various points in the planning process, the FTA, NCPC, AOC, and National Park Service butted in and blocked funding or plans. A perfect example of the federal blockage was that there is a federal law which forbids any overhead wires in this section of the city, sometimes called the L'Enfant City, for purely aesthetic reasons. Seeing as overhead power supply is the preferred tried and tested way to efficiently power electrical transit, this has proved to be a major issue. This law is part of what killed DC's original streetcar system. The network relied on underground cable power systems, which often got blocked by debris, and that made it unreliable. As a result, DC switching to buses in the 1950s was initially an improvement for transit in the urban core. To get the modern streetcar up and running just on H Street, Congress had to pass a specific variance just for that one street to have overhead wires. But without the certainty they would get that variance, and with the project facing major delays as a result, the city had to conduct costly studies to plan alternatives. The delays also gave more and more time for support to sputter out as the public became bored or moved on, and for political leadership to change. Though Mayor Gray was a major champion of the project, political support beyond him was lacking and ever shifting. Council members in some wards kept obstructing the project, while interest groups and community organizations either cheered or feared the economic development which streetcar service promised, to say nothing of the NIMBYs who decry anything ever changing. Attempts to placate or compromise with certain groups, or an inability to work with others, led to poor decisions which would hinder the long-term effectiveness of the streetcar. After Amtrak and the FRA raised issues with the original plan for integrating the streetcar with Union Station, this critical connection was moved to a less than ideal location. When you step off the metro, it's just over a 7-minute walk through winding passages, the garage, and across half the street to get to the streetcar stop. And that's assuming you know where you're going, as the wayfinding left a lot to be desired. The stop itself is in the median of a busy road, which is often loud and unpleasant to wait at. WMATA and DDOT could never get on the same page for how bus and streetcar service would complement one another, and so they act more as competitors than they do allies. Beyond an announcement on the metro for transfers at Union Station, this little dashed orange line on the WMATA bus map is the only appearance the streetcar makes in WMATA wayfinding. On the famous metro map, the line is nowhere to be found. Along the route, WMATA's buses and the streetcar don't share stops, which leads to some confusion amongst potential riders of both services. To keep groups fearing parking removal or lane reduction happy, the streetcar did not get dedicated lanes on most of the route, which is the source of many problems it now faces with its operation. It often gets stuck in traffic or is forced to wait for a tow truck to come out and clear the path because some jerk decided to double park in the streetcar's path, or couldn't park in the parking space properly and has their car sticking out into the path of the streetcar. This is such a common issue that DDOT has dedicated tow trucks operating on standby. In some cases, the streetcar gets stopped by someone pulling in or out of a parking space, or by the bus stopping to pick up passengers in front of it. This all results in both delays and slow service. All these issues made the streetcar an easy punching bag. Even among our own urban planning circles, there was contention around the streetcar because local and national media loved to highlight every single shortcoming of the project, both before and after it was completed. Every dollar over budget, every delay, every poor design choice, they were all used to justify one narrative or another without much thought as to the complicated reasons behind these issues, and often without acknowledgement of the solid ridership the streetcar had in spite of them. On a per-mile basis, the streetcar's ridership was in the middle of the pack of other streetcar systems across the country. Pre-pandemic, the streetcar was getting just over 1,200 riders per mile every day, ranking at 18 out of 37 similar systems, higher than systems in Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Sacramento, and St. Louis. This is impressive because the line on paper should never come close to that kind of ridership. It does not connect well to the DC Metro, offers very little connection to other neighborhoods, unlike overlapping bus routes, and it is often stuck in traffic. And yet, people ride it. Beyond the ridership, it has had a transformative impact on the area around it. It has helped transform the corridor into a vibrant, bustling neighborhood, a far cry from the crumbling buildings and strip malls which dominated it 20 years ago. And all of this brings us back to the question we began with. Why is it not worth saving? Surely, if the ridership is as good as this, and with the new Commander Stadium set to be built right at the end of the existing line, the streetcar must be worth improving and retaining, right? Well, as we said before, this is exactly what we had set out to do when we had initially begun to write this video. However, that was where we realized it wasn't worth saving. We did our research, pulled relevant data and statutes, and we actually had come up with a viable plan to save the DC Streetcar. We were going to propose creating a new business improvement district, or BID, basically a special district where all local businesses pay a bid fee with a board of elected leaders, often local business owners, experts, and government representatives, using that money to improve the area. This kind of district is common across DC and has been used to improve parks, streets, public events, and even create and advocate for long-term development plans. In our vision, we would have created a bid within a block or two of the streetcar route and had a nominal property tax of maybe 1% within it. While this would have faced various political hurdles, including needing congressional approval, we believe that these might have been surmountable, especially if framed as part of the Commander Stadium plan. And it would have brought in more than enough revenue to sustainably operate, maintain, and improve the streetcar. Next, we wanted to address the underlying design issues impeding reliability and connectivity which have been holding the streetcar back. To do that, first it would need dedicated lanes. This would be easy enough to achieve on the Benning Road section where the streetcar already runs the median. However, for most of the route, where the streetcar operated in the right lane between traffic and parked cars, it would require some structural and functional changes to the street. Dedicating the right lane to just transit would necessitate the removal of the parking lane. And this is where there might be some initial pushback from stakeholders. Businesses will claim that the loss of parking will hurt their bottom line. Both businesses and residents will also complain that there needs to be places for delivery vehicles to stop. These are, however, surmountable with proper policy, compromise, and education. To the parking point, at most each business has 1 or 2 spaces directly in front of it, which means only 5 to 10 customers max at a time use these spaces. In reality, data would suggest that it is closer to 3 people at a time, given the average ridership of a car is 1.5 people per trip. This means that most of the customers a business will have probably took transit, walked there, or were willing to park a few blocks away. If parking is such a must, we'd recommend a parking garage or 2 along the corridor so that parking supply remains, but the street level activity can be improved. We'd suggest replacing the street parking with streeteries and parklets, or we could put in bike lanes instead. Studies show that improving pedestrian, bike, and transit access to a business does more to boost profits than a couple of parking spaces ever will, especially in urban areas. To the loss of the travel lane, most of the cars traveling along H Street aren't customers, but rather are people going in and out of the city, as directly across the Anacostia River is a connection to the freeway which feeds into the regional highway network. If the road capacity is lowered on H Street, the traffic distribution will readjust and the street could stop trying to double as an urban collector road and instead can function as the neighborhood main street it was meant to be. As to deliveries, delivery vehicles can stop in the loading docks or rear alleys, which many of the businesses and new buildings have. Next, with dedicated lanes, it only made sense for the streetcar and the buses to be better synchronized. Currently, as we said before, the 2 services operate more as competitors than as complementary services. Since they would now be sharing dedicated lanes, it only made sense for them to share stops, synchronize their schedules, improve wayfinding, and function as overlapping complementary services. And as soon as we put this in our plan, it hit us like a brick wall. What is the streetcar doing that a bus can't? The trade-offs and differences between streetcars, light rail, and buses could, and probably eventually will, be an entire video in its own right, but let's just focus on this very specific example for a moment. With the given footprint, especially if we put in dedicated lanes and shared stops, what can this streetcar do that the bus can't? Well, the ride on the streetcar is a bit smoother. They don't produce any particulate matter pollution or tailpipe emissions. In the current configuration, they're more ADA accessible than the bus due to the level boarding platforms, and they can be cheaper to operate and maintain than a bus. But beyond these, many of which could be fixed with tweaks to the buses and stops, in terms of capacity, they're about equal with existing rolling stock, and the streetcar has to stop where the tracks do while the bus can just keep on going. And it was in this moment that we realized, with the current 2.2 mile route, the streetcar just isn't worth saving. We don't say this lightly. Axing the streetcar has a lot of potential ripple effects. Streetcars and rail lines in general have long been seen as a much more reliable and permanent transit investment than bus lines, both by communities and investors. The thought process is that a city isn't going to spend all that money on a rail line just to stop using it. Plus, unlike a bus route, you can't just change where the rail line goes on a whim. So, development tends to follow rail transit, as it is seen as reliable and permanent. The pitfall of this is that many cities plan rail transit not as transit, but as a tool to spur new development, which can result in really bad transit, but that's another video entirely. Rail also tends to be seen as safer and more desirable than buses for various underlying issues of class and race, as well as the general aesthetic, which even we admit is powerful, as many ardent transit fans love rail transit for aura alone. H Street was no different. Though development was not spread evenly along the line and has stalled with the ebbs and flows of broader macroeconomic forces, a lot of development still rushed to this area after the streetcar opened. And this was true of a lot of the streetcars built around the same time across the United States. The so-called Obama streetcars, so named due to many receiving federal assistance during the first term of his administration, were a mixed bag of transit quality and success, but they all helped spur development along them due to the permanence they implied. And shutting down the DC Streetcar after just a decade of operation is going to call that permanence into question. Will developers be as willing to build along future rail transit lines if the system is too new? Even if it's an established system, the closure of the DC Streetcar proves that politicians are willing to end even decently performing services. So should investors, who famously crave certainty and stability, trust that any transit service will stick around? And what about the communities these projects serve? Even setting aside the chaotic process which was required to get the streetcar going in DC, more broadly, will taxpayers be willing to invest in major transit projects if, even after they're built, they don't last as long as MASH, The Big Bang Theory, The Bachelor, or SpongeBob? And then, when you do factor in the chaotic politics which took a network meant to be a second metro down to a couple of miles of surprisingly well-performing tracks, which already was used by opponents of these projects to dissuade further investment, you see why ending this line is going to have long-term consequences for transit beyond DC. But, nevertheless, we stand by the position that it's not worth saving the streetcar right now. We spoke with so many of our colleagues in the planning world, hoping they would disagree with us, but over and over again, they all came to the same conclusion we did. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. None of this is to say we shouldn't be improving transit along the corridor, though. Quite the opposite. Instead of spending money on what would essentially be a nice local transit service, let's spread the improvements out. The D20, formerly X2, bus is one of the most utilized bus routes in the entire city, and it operates right where the DC Streetcar does. So why just have bus lanes on one segment of the journey? Let's put dedicated lanes in for the entire length of this line, improve ADA stops along it, and maybe give it signal priority. Just like that, you're one step away from a full bus rapid transit line if you added off-board fare collection. Doing this would not only help the tens of thousands of people who take the bus daily already, it would help further grow ridership, and it might help to abate some of the ripple effects we were just outlining. After all, if this were to occur in a timely manner, then the city didn't cut transit, but rather, they would be shifting their resources to provide better transit for more people. Additionally, if they take the last step and create proper BRT, something only a handful of US cities have ever done, it could be used to show that buses can also be a viable mode of transit to invest around. Finally, this could eventually be used to justify more BRT lines across the city and region, and ideally, reinvesting in a revival of the streetcar or streetcar network as ridership demand increases and outpaces BRT capacity. There is also the possibility that the streetcar could, if the city chooses, not be shuttered entirely. The DC Commanders are in the process of building a brand new stadium along the banks of the Anacostia River on the site of the old RFK Stadium. The plan is to redevelop the adjacent parking lots into a vibrant mixed-use neighborhood. If all goes as planned, this could be the best urban planning in the entire NFL. We should know, we did a whole series on it. Please check it out. There is even talk of adding a new metro station in the heart of this new neighborhood, both to serve the area and to better manage game day crowds. The stadium neighborhood's northern edge is right where the streetcar currently ends. It could be possible that if the Commanders, or anyone using the stadium for an event, are willing to put up the money, the streetcar could be run as a special event shuttle service from Union Station to the stadium. If it can make a couple of limited stops along H Street, this could help to funnel stadium attendees to local businesses. Since anyone taking the streetcar would be heading to or from Union Station, they will probably be from out of town. These people might be more willing to take a single-seat ride on the streetcar than needing to take the metro, which involves a transfer. But since the stadium won't be open until at least 2030, the streetcar is still going to be shuttered for a few years, in which time the transit lanes and other improvements could be added for the buses. Willingness to improve and expand a transit service is often what separates those which succeed from those which fail. This line could have been something great if it had been given the support it needed. Sadly, plans to improve or expand it after its opening constantly stalled or came to nothing. If just the planned expansion across the river to Benning Road, which had been in the cards as recently as 2024, had been completed, we would have been making a strong case for saving the DC Streetcar, while still making the further improvements we proposed. One only needs look at the Kansas City Streetcar for an example of a system which received proper support. It in many ways is a direct parallel of what could have been. Like DC, the Kansas City Streetcar faced its own, albeit different, political and planning headaches, with it opening a 2.2-mile line, just like DC, in 2016, the same year as DC. Like DC, it operated in mixed traffic, but enjoyed much higher ridership than DC. This is thanks in part to it being located more in the center of downtown, allowing it to connect more existing desirable destinations and possibly due to better coordination with the bus services. In many ways, it was a downtown shuttle. It also enjoyed much more political support after being built, with multiple extensions being completed in 2025. The southern extension has dedicated lanes. The streetcars themselves are modern, and it has and continues to help spur economic development around it. While the DC Streetcar languished and struggled without proper support from its city, the Kansas City Streetcar excelled and thrived with solid and consistent support from its city.
And Streetcar 201 will be entering for the final time into the yard on track number 7.
And so, here we are, March 31st, 2026. The end of a journey, 24 years in the making. What started as an ambitious vision for the future of the nation's capital now comes to a halt. Plagued by politics and red tape from its inception, it faced cuts and undermining at every turn. The fact that even this 2.2-mile segment opened was less a miracle and more an accident. And yet, despite all the obstacles, corners cut, shortcomings, this line still moved far more people than it should ever have and transformed this once dilapidated corridor into a thriving neighborhood. It was the mighty steed of H Street. And now, it is put out of its misery like a lame horse. The DC Streetcar truly is a transit tragedy.